What's going on, everyone? Today I bring you the ultimate melee berserker. This is easily some of the most damage you can get out of melee, and it's incredibly fun to melt bosses this quickly. Now, before we even get into this, just be aware that melee is a bit more boss to boss type situation. You'll need to modify your setup depending on who you're facing, especially if your weapon has no ranged ability. Today's build specifically works wonders on Shahala and Cancer, two painfully difficult bosses that have loads of health. This busted melee build beat them up pretty quickly, and now it's my go-to for them, as even on Apocalypse, it did quarters of their health at a time. If you hate those bosses or just want a decent melee build for dungeons, then try out the Rampaging Berserker. For the Prime class, you want to run with Alchemist. This will grant you a couple of things that really help us tank hits and put out more damage. You gain 3 additional concoction buffs, meaning you can take 4 total concoctions for a variety of powerful stat increases. You gain 25% extra damage overall and 5% more crit chance. Then, taking a Relic will grant us a random buff, which it's rare to get the exact one you want, but more defense, extra damage, some healing, and faster speed are all things you could possibly obtain for 60 seconds. And since we'll be taking our Relic often during boss fights, we can make some good use of this. For the skill, you want Vile Frenzy Dust. I did mess around with all 3 skills, and while Stone Skin is great at times, Frenzy Dust just wins out big here. You gain 20% faster melee speed for 15 seconds, which isn't long, but for that short time, you get a flurry of high damage attacks that can cut bosses down quickly. Also, very useful for getting out of AoEs, as your speed is increased nicely as well. Your subclass needs to be Challenger. The truth of the matter is that Challenger is a must for most melee builds. You gain 35% extra damage all the time, as you'll constantly be close to your opponent, and you also gain some damage reduction, stamina assistance, and perks for using your relic near an enemy, which basically means you use your relic next to the boss and then go ham, getting some insane damage output and surviving most heavy-hitting attacks that bosses can dish out. For the skill, you want Juggernaut. For 25 seconds, you become a monster, getting 3 stacks of Bulwark for extra defense, 15% more movement speed, and a whopping 50% increase to melee damage, also reducing stagger by 1. This skill alone will skyrocket your melee damage and make you nearly unkillable under good circumstances. As for the armor, we want as much defense as possible. Leto Mark II for the helmet, chest, and boots, with Labyrinth gloves for your final piece. This is currently the most defense offered from armor and pointless to run without when trying to survive through attacks. For your relic, you want the Crystal Heart. Now, I myself am not a big fan of this guy, as on use it will slow your movement speed by 50%, which is a pain and a half. However, it also grants really strong healing for 10 seconds and offers 25% reduced damage. If you use your Challenger skill and this at the same time, you get to the maximum damage reduction allowed by the game, around 80.2%, which it's going to cap at 80. So we can take almost any hit without dying and heal through it. We aren't unkillable, as our healing effectiveness isn't high enough for that, but it's enough to keep you in combat and whacking away. For the Relic Fragments, you want Charge Melee Cost, Melee Critical Damage, and Critical Chance. I found that this gives you a lot of really high damage crit, and the decrease in stamina cost helps out in trickier moments. As I mentioned, this build is primarily for bosses that you know are on the ground, so you really don't need to care about your weapons that much. But here's the setup I found to work best for me when it comes to weapons. Royal Hunting Bow with Corrosive Rounds as the mod, and Supercharger as the mutator. This grants your bow a lot of crit damage if you need to fire it, and the acid will make enemies take more damage. So you can potentially just apply that real quick to make your melee better. The bow gets loads of damage without really any bonus at all, making it nice to have when we run up on a flying enemy all of a sudden. Of course, your melee is very important, and when going full Juggernaut, there isn't anything better than Stonebreaker. Currently the highest damaging sword in the game as far as I know, and has an ability that lets it hit twice if you use a charge attack. This guy is a monster and will wreck everything in your path with powerful swings that feel amazing. With Overdrive as your mutator, you will gain a lot more crit chance and damage. Essentially, this grants you up to 5 stacks of a buff when you crit that will increase the crit damage and chance. So after all 5 stacks are applied, you get really large numbers consistently. Funnily enough, this weapon does not have the best stagger in the game, although it does have a really good amount, thus allowing you to hold down the charge attacks over and over for some fat red numbers. As for your sidearm, I ran with the repeater pistol, which is very reliable and has a decent magazine size. Twisting Wounds as a mutator helps to apply bleed really quick in case bosses gain health affixes, and Boar as your mod is an absolute must, and honestly, kinda broken. You see, Boar spawns these purple pustules that grant you more crit chance and the ability to hit weak spots there. A fun pairing with melee is you can actually spawn 2 of these boars at the same time, and then hit them several times in a row, giving you over 6,000 damage a swing in some instances. The issue is that this only works on select bosses. Anything out of your reach, and now you really cannot hit the boar. Hence why this is a more case-by-case build. But that's okay because it's so much fun getting thousands of crit at a time just beating an enemy with a giant sword. Shoot boar twice and get to hitting. As for amulets and rings, we want more damage for our melee and a way to not fat roll. Matriarch's Insignia increases melee damage by 35% and causes all successful melee attacks to restore 10 stamina. This is currently the best melee amulet as long as your enemy is within ground's reach, because it provides a large boost to damage and grants you near infinite stamina. Stamina is required for you to use your charged heavy attacks, which is where your highest possible damage comes from. Wearing this lets you use them almost entirely, and it makes the melee combat feel better overall. Problem is, for flying bosses, of which there are a lot of, this is simply worse than the Butcher's Fetish Amulet. Again, why I think it's better to have 2 separate builds for both methods. Burden of the Destroyer increases damage by 15%. This one isn't set in stone as there are a couple other options for melee damage, but 15% to all damage is nice and an easy ring to throw on. Xania's Malice increases weak spot damage by up to 30% after successful weak spot attacks, which when used on the Boar mod simply deletes sections of boss health in one swing. Probability Cord increases crit damage by 30%, of which I'm sure you know by now as it's used in nearly every build. This thing is simply the easiest and best boost to crit that you can get. Then we have the Bright Steel Ring in order to get the lightest dodge even in heavy armor. I tried running without this, but honestly it's easier to throw it on. We could go for the Ring of Flawed Beauty or Sapphire Dreamstone if you really don't want to dodge at all, as they both provide some good tools for the build. But I personally ended up with Bright Steel Ring as it let me backstep attack if I wanted to, or just dodge high damage attacks if need be. As for traits, we want as much defense as we can get while keeping our mods and skills coming back quickly. Fortify for extremely high armor effectiveness, Potency so your concoctions last much longer, Strong Back as it's unavoidable when running Challenger even though it doesn't benefit us, Vigor for health, Endurance for stamina, and only 2 points into Spirit as we're forced to take them, but we don't need good mod regen as we'll be getting them back from melee damage. The full expertise so you can use your skills over and over, 8 points into Arcane Strike because this increases mod power generation from melee attacks. As we'll only be using melee, this is very effective and usually results in Boar being usable right after it runs out. Finally, go with Glutton to take the Relic faster and Siphoner for Lifesteal. The Lifesteal will be very important as it allows you to eat damage and heal from your attacks. Paired up with the Frenzy skill, you have fast enough attacks to heal almost any damage taken. Now, since we are taking Alchemist, we do get 3 additional concoctions, and with 4 total buffs, we can gain a lot of utility for our build. Bark Extract increases armor by 30, which helps to keep us with very high damage reduction. Mudtooth's Tonic grants 25 extra points of health, which provides us the chance to heal after powerful attacks and survive better overall. Dark Cider increases health, movement speed, and stamina by 6.66%. Not a lot for each, but enough to matter in all departments. Finally, we have Xenoplasm, which reduces skill cooldowns by 10%. As I mentioned before, the Juggernaut skill is the most powerful tool melee builds have, and the extra cooldown can help you get it back 2 or 3 times a fight if need be. How do you actually want to use this build? Well, I mentioned how everything works, and thankfully you can really go at it without much worry. But for the best results, you want to do the following. Enter the boss arena and run as close to the boss as you can get. Activate your relic and then use both skills. Shoot Boar twice and start using your charged melee, trying to hit the Boar spots. Done correctly, you should have maximum damage reduction and output some nutty damage in a very quick burst. Every time Boar runs out, shoot 2 again and go back at it. Now you do want to take your relic every 10 seconds to keep your passive buffs active and stay at the DR cap. And with this much damage, you shouldn't have any issue with running out. This is simply not set up to fight every boss. Some are too far away or too aggressive to be dealt with and will require a long-range melee style to take down. Here are a few examples of bosses this would work on. Cancer, as you can ride his butt and always hit him. Shahala, as you can hit his hands when he spawns them. Red Prince, as he has a fire phase, which you can really go to town on. The Huntress, who is actually very susceptible to melee. Magister Dulian, although he can be tricky with the acid and his tongue attack. The Corruptor can be dealt with nicely, although the Regenerator affix ruins it entirely, as he can out-heal your damage to the Golem. Heula's Shadow, although hitting Boar is too hard, so straight up melee attacks beat her out. Any aberration will get melted by this as well. That's a large list of bosses you can simply blast your way through with high damage and little effort. Now, anything with high stagger and fast movement simply won't work. Fei Rin and Fei Lin and Lawsome are too darn teleporty, so you simply cannot attack enough to stay alive and deal damage. The Nightweaver is too nimble in both phases, and the Ravager is much too aggressive to not dodge. Of course, we also have Venom and Annihilation at the very end, which I don't even think I need to say anything about. It's just not happening without a ranged melee. So if you're looking for an extremely high damage melee build that can tank high damage, then the Rampaging Berserker build is right for you. It ain't perfect, but not every build can be perfect, and that's not the point of Remnant anyway. Have fun with build variety and see what's possible in different fights. This one here will be absolutely amazing and a blast to use in the right fights, so don't be afraid to try it out. If you did enjoy this video, a like would be awesome, and I thank you for watching. Go bully some bosses, and I'll catch you next time.